Fáilte. Welcome to the Village Oak Tree. I'm your host, Terrance Ó Domhnaill. Thank you for joining me once again. So, once again this week, the United States is at a historical crossroads. Trump and his loyalists are running roughshod across the country still, and the chaos is consuming everything every day. The news feeds in the U.S. are full of little else but some kind of new Trump attention grabber, from the new concentration camp in the Florida Everglades to this hugely unpopular bill being battled back and forth between the House and the Senate. So come sit you down somewhere comfortable for a bit, and let me talk about some of the things that are going on and some personal memories of times past about my military career. Last week, I said I wanted to continue talking about how hard it's becoming to live in the United States now. With Trump tearing everything down more and more every week, with the help of his sycophantic Congress and 6-justice majority on the Supreme Court, things are getting worse more and more every week, it seems. It's not just in the U.S. either. I've said this in previous podcasts that Europe is going under, with Germany in the lead. Their economy has been in recession for the last 2 years and is steadily getting worse thanks to Donald J. Trump. If Germany can't turn things around very soon, the ripple effect across the EU may become a big wave by next year. And they want to increase their defense spending to 5% to satisfy Trump. Where are they going to get the money? Here in the U.S., the fight is on in the Washington, D.C. about this big, beautiful bill, they're calling it. In the draft created in the House of Representatives, it would kick approximately 14 million poor people off Medicaid over the next 10 years. It would decimate the SNAP food program, putting millions of poor people back into food insecurity. The elderly who depend on Medicaid to pay for their senior facility care would be evicted and be put on the streets. Maybe their children will pick them up. But what if they can't? What if the children can't afford to take care of their parents? Especially if these seniors were in a memory care facility like my late mother was. Who would pay for the in-home nursing they have to have? Private health insurance providers have already said they won't touch that. Who's going to provide food for these poor people once the government takes away their SNAP benefits, the free school breakfast and lunch programs? For the richest country on the earth, why does the United States refuse to take care of its own people? We all know the answer to that question now after all the news stories about the corporate tax breaks and such. Trades for the morbidly rich and starvation for some of the poorest of us. No one is absolutely sure what this bill will look like by the time they get finished with it, but given how the MAGA Republicans are these days, it still won't be very good for the American people by the time it gets to Trump's desk. One sort of piece of good news: 3 Republican senators voted no on the bill, one of which was Senator Susan Collins of Maine, who had been on the fence until the last minute, apparently. It's hard to say whether this will help her with the people in Maine, but at least she finally stood up to the king in his court. On the other hand, Senator Murkowski of Alaska, another fence sitter, ultimately caved to pressure and voted yes. She's touted as being the deciding vote for yes that allowed this crap to go back to the House. She likely has sealed her doom in any future re-election campaigns in Alaska once her constituents start paying for a mistake. She likely gave in to her fears of Trump and her rich donors when it came to crunch time. I wonder if she'll soon announce that she's not running for re-election, like a few others have done recently. The majority of the GOP politicians are more loyal to Trump and their rich donors than they are to the people who voted for them, which the American middle class and poorer voters, especially the younger people, are starting to see now. I don't think there's much good that's going to save the MAGA politicians from a near shutout in the next election. Not that the Democrats are that much better now. They still have a long way to go before all the voters will get on board with that train with them from last year. For some, this animosity goes back even further than last year. Then we have more news from the battlegrounds of the United States. And that's what we're starting to become. There are more and more stories about what ICE is doing to people who dare to stand up to them. American citizens are now being arrested everywhere on made-up charges of assault on federal officers and obstructing officers in the performance of their duties. One story I found last weekend, They're even going out to people's houses and blowing doors in to take revenge over the slightest hindrance to their missions. The story details how ICE blew a door off a house with no notice to apprehend someone who got into a traffic accident with an ICE van. ICE claims it was a deliberate attempt to stop them. The man's girlfriend told reporters that it was just a simple traffic accident. Who are you going to believe? There have been plenty of other stories about ICE teams enacting revenge on people who they think are trying to resist their efforts to kidnap people without warrants, identification, or anything else. There was the story last week about the father of 3 U.S. Marines who was beaten by ICE cops for, allegedly, swinging a weed eater at them as they were chasing him down. Although the one video on the social media that only shows the cops beating this man as he was laying on the ground with 2 burly agents sitting on him. I know what I'd do if I saw a bunch of dudes in tactical gear come after me without identifying themselves. I'd probably fight back, thinking I was being taken somewhere against my will. I have the right to defend myself against people who wish to do me harm in my state. Although the likelihood of that happening to me are slim, as I'm white. The war between the people and the government is starting to heat up. I expect there will be more such resistance in the near future as people are getting fed up and are ready to fight back. Do I think there will be casualties over this eventually? Yes, I do. As more and more people start to get angry over these Gestapo tactics, plus all of the economic woes Trump is imposing on the people, things may get ugly soon. Trump still has the authority to deploy National Guard troops around the country for now, as the issue is still locked up in the courts. But given how 6 justices on the Supreme Court seem willing to give Trump whatever he wants, this might become a permanent thing. Then our worst nightmares will be realized once Trump puts military boots on the ground around the country. The next question will be, do the civilian citizens in this country want to go up against actual troops? Let's talk about that for a minute. First of all, the only thing scary about the National Guard is their uniforms and weapons. They're not very well trained to deal with armed civilians. They're not trained very well to deal with highly trained enemy combatants either. For the most part, these citizen soldiers are not much different than the people they're being told to defend against. The only thing that sets them apart is their uniforms and gear. If an armed group of American citizens were to confront them over one of Trump's unconstitutional edicts, most of them would cave, especially the junior enlisted. Now, if they're fired upon, that would change everything. Like any soldier, their training would kick in and they would defend themselves in whatever they were guarding, such as a federal building, for instance. I don't think we're there yet in the U.S., but I could see someday soon is an armed group of civilians, to include military veterans, confronting ICE and some sort of battle ensue. Will the National Guard defend the ICE stormtroopers as part of their orders? Yes, if told to do so. Would they go out and start arresting people in neighborhoods and marketplaces? I don't think so, as the public outcry would be too much. The National Guard would only defend ICE stormtroopers if a battle were to break out where the Guard troops were stationed, such as any federal building they're tasked with guarding. I could be wrong, but that's how I see it right now. There are National Guard troops who have seen combat and active duty. I was one of those. That's how I know a little bit about the mindset of these Guard troops. Most of the junior enlisted have only been on active duty long enough to attend basic training in AIT, which means Advanced Infantry Training for those who don't understand military acronyms. They may also have attended a technical of some sort as well afterwards. This goes for a lot of the NCOs as well. They're weekend warriors for the most part. They attend once-a-month weekend drills with minimal training in combat arms, if any. They travel to a base for 2 weeks in the summer, again, with minimal combat training, and they're done for the year. Once in a while, when the U.S. goes to war, a National Guard unit will be deployed overseas to help out the active duty troops. As an Army reservist in Afghanistan, I worked with a West Virginia National Guard ODA unit. Think of them as a National Guard Special Forces unit. They were pretty well trained, but when I was with the 278th Armored Cavalry Tennessee Army National Guard, it was a different story. Coming from active duty, drilling with these guys was a joke. I spent a year with my unit, and during our 2-week summer vacation to Fort Stewart, South Carolina, the equipment, such as the guns, didn't work. The other training equipment didn't work. And after a few days of this, I gave up. Not to mention the senior NCOs and officers barely had a clue on how to conduct the training. Not that I knew what was going on either, as no one was instructing anyone on what to do. It was just the upper echelon getting their orders from the Fort Stewart training cadre and attempting to execute the training and failing miserably. Everyone seemed to be running around like chickens with their heads cut off. Discipline was a joke. I'll relate one, not funny story, just to give people an idea of what I mean. We were packing up our gear, cleaning up to go home, and I ran into a young man I had served with on active duty during Desert Storm in the Persian Gulf. He had worked for me as a junior enlisted Marine boat mechanic back in 1992. Our Army MOSs were 88 Lima back then. When I ran into him again at Fort Stewart, it was the summer of 2001, and he was a Sergeant E5 and a gunner for an M1 Abrams tank. As we were catching up on old times, he told me about how his tank crew fired a training round from their tank during one of the exercises on an ambulance. He was on their way out across the training grounds to attend to a hurt soldier. Training had been suspended because of the medical emergency, but they fired on the ambulance anyway because it was fun. He laughed as he told me this story. This gives you an idea of the mentality of a typical National Guard soldier in today's world. My biggest training issue during this 2-week vacation was that none of the issued firearms worked. The 50 cal on the truck mount that I was in charge of didn't work. The M16 I had didn't work with the training bullets in it, and so on. Mostly, I spent the days puttering with 10 ACs and a towable generator and sweating my ass off in the extreme humidity. All of this is just to give people who may see this as an idea of what our nation's National Guard units are capable of or not. They have to deal with equipment failures a lot more than active duty troops, manpower issues, and other logistics, such as food and water. Whereas federal troops, who receive more money for training and equipment, don't have these issues near as much. When I transferred over to a Federal Army Reserve unit a couple of months after we returned from Fort Stewart, it was like night and day with regard to money for training and equipment. The only difference here is when a unit, whether National Guard or Army Reserve, becomes deployed by the federal government and the feds pick up the tab, the supplies needed to sustain that unit are provided by the Pentagon instead of the state. Just means that these soldiers are now being fed and equipped by the active duty component for the duration of their deployment. It doesn't change the caliber of their training or their mindset. You can outfit the least trained military unit with the best equipment and feed them the best food, but unless they know what to do with that fancy equipment, it's all moot. I'm not saying that National Guard troops aren't trained at all. I'm telling you that as a rule, their training is subpar compared to the federal troops as a rule because the states have to pay for it, unless the feds mobilize them. On the other hand, ICE stormtroopers are full of ex-active duty combat troops and over-militarized police with training in urban warfare. I read somewhere a while ago that ICE recruiters deliberately go after ex-military just for their infantry combat training. They want that mindset to go after their targets. Can you imagine a bunch of 11 Bravo infantry warriors who came back from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and are now working for agencies like ICE, DEA, and the ATF? Especially ICE and Border Patrol. I happen to know a couple of decorated soldiers who were recruited and signed up for the Border Patrol right after 9/11. I ran afoul of one such veteran when I lived in northern Maine. Maybe someday I'll tell everyone the story of when I tried to enter the U.S. from a vacation in Canada and was trashed by a former Marine turned Customs and Border Patrol agent late one night. This happened many years ago, and they're much worse now. I'm afraid to leave the country right now, as they may not let me back in, especially if my wife was with me, despite her green card and having never been in trouble with U.S. law enforcement. As I said earlier, I have this training. I have combat training, and I have combat experience. I may be older than dirt, but that training is still with me. So imagine what would happen if a bunch of unidentified men in tactical gear accosted me or my wife with the intent of taking us. I asked them who they were, and they refused to tell me and didn't provide me with a valid reason for them to attack us. I plan to defend myself. I live in a defend your ground state, and I have a concealed carry license. How many other veterans would do this across the country? How many veterans would revert to their combat training and instincts to defend themselves in this kind of situation? How long will it be before ICE agents start to come under fire from people defending themselves? They're already complaining of being assaulted while attempting to do their jobs. We don't really know how truthful this is, as the DOJ lies to the American public nearly every day now, so it seems. I'm dramatizing a lot of this, but I'm only speaking what's on my mind, and I'm sure a lot of other people have been asking themselves these questions as well lately. When Trump deployed troops to Los Angeles, he started making a lot of people sit up and take notice. A lot of people were asking, what if? What if protesters pushed a soldier and he reverted to his training and shot someone? What if someone shoots an ICE agent in what is perceived by them as self-defense? Will Americans see a vindictive agency go after them with a kill order? It's starting to seem that way with some of the latest news reports. How long before we start reading news stories of ICE shootings while in pursuit of immigrants and resistance fighters? I don't think we're too far off from that right now, as Trump and Miller keep putting more pressure on these agents to round up people, no matter what their status is. One of the other things I've been reading about is this policy of not asking for identification from those they're arresting, whether undocumented immigrants or American citizens who may look like someone from a Latin American country. They don't seem to care whether you're a citizen or not. If you get in their way, you'll be taken, and you will have to sort it out in a court if you even get that opportunity. With this other latest Supreme Court ruling letting ICE deport people to other countries other than the one people came from, if you do get picked up and deported, you'll have lost any opportunity to see a judge. Trump and Miller are counting on that. Imagine if you're an American citizen, you're picked up by ICE for obstructing or resisting them and deported to another country without due process. Even if the allegations aren't true, who are you going to call if you're in the deserts of Libya or down in the slums of South Africa somewhere? This is the United States we live in now. One of deliberate extreme poverty for a large percentage of the people, with more and more soon to be added to the statistics with the tariffs starting to kick in and this soon to be passed big beautiful bill, as they call it. A country that has stormtroopers running around taking people off the streets with impunity, whether they're illegal or not, and using extreme force against anyone who dares to stand up to them. Wait till it's time to deport the Haitians who just lost their temporary legal status. Although, as of this morning, some judge is giving it back to them. So again, this whole business with the Haitians is kind of in limbo right now. They're all supposed to leave the country by September at the latest. Well, again, that's been put on hold for now. But the Cubans, there's a bunch of Cubans in the same boat. Will all these people just leave quietly? I don't think so. Some will try to evade the deportation orders. Will some of them fight back? We're just starting to see the tip of the spear with regard to all of this. Once the economy collapses some more by the end of the summer, things may get a little ugly in certain places around the U.S. If violence does break out, the economy will take an even bigger hit. One thing I've noticed is the absence of the word recession from the news feeds lately. Everyone was talking about it a couple of months ago, but now it's all quiet, unless you listen to people like Professor Richard Wolff. I'm still talking about it here, but there are very few people who will watch this video or read the narrative in Substack, Medium.com, or even less so on my website blog. I'm not a big name media star, so this will largely go unnoticed. But nonetheless, a recession is coming. The experts are saying by the end of 2025 or the first quarter of 2026. With the U.S. Treasury on the brink of default, in fairness, it has been for several years, it won't take much of a push to send the Fed over the fiscal cliff. And the current domestic issues could turn out to be a catalyst that everyone's been warning about. With the migrant labor force largely disappearing now out of fear, the tariffs curtailing international trade, and fears of war overseas, investors are bailing on the U.S. So much for bringing industries and factories back to the U.S. Trump is now scaring them off. Once the rising prices start to really hit the American consumers by this fall, things will become very different. Attitudes are already changing. Add into that a recession, and things could get ugly for the government governments, both state and federal. People are already angry. Kick them when they're down, and they'll probably come up swinging. We're starting to see a little bit of that now, but it's still a little early. Wait until August and September when parents can't buy school supplies for their kids. And people still think the United States is the greatest country to live in. It's still better than a lot of others, but that distinction of being the best is quickly losing its appeal, even for citizens who've lived here all their lives. As you go about your daily lives in the U.S., keep an eye out on your surroundings now. You never know if ICE is watching over a parking lot at a store near you. Don't accidentally get caught in one of their sweeps. You may have to learn how to speak Arabic or Swahili if you do get picked up, even by accident. Welcome to the new world of climate warming and authoritarian governments. I bet, as a U.S. citizen, you never thought you'd be living under one. As you think about that, stay tuned as I read another chapter from Michael Campy's dystopian future series, The Priest, Chapter 35, coming right up after this commercial break. I want to take a couple of minutes to explain how you can support what I'm doing here, either through a direct donation, a subscription, or purchase in my book. First, let me say I don't monetize my work up front, but I'm not adverse to asking for donations of any amount or currency on my website for paid subscriptions to my Substack page if you have the ability to do so. My annual or monthly subscription rates are as low as Substack will allow, if that helps. If nothing else, like, follow, restack, or sign up for a free subscription and share with anyone you wish to add my voice to the many in the independent media who don't like what's happening to people around the world. I may not be able to join any street protests, but I can surely protest here. I appreciate everyone who tunes in to watch, listen, or read my thoughts about how all of this is affecting us. I realize that I'm just one voice among the many, but that's how a rebellion gets its start. We start by raising our collective voices to be heard loud and clear by those who would attempt to take away our rights and freedoms. Americans had one rebellion in the 1770s to stop a tyrant, and we can always start another one. In Ireland, they've had many rebellions through the centuries to stop the tyrant kings of the past, so my ancestors have a lot of experience with that. Let me finish up by showing you this little video about my dystopian fiction story I wrote, Fugitives in the United States. If this story sounds interesting, go to any major book retailer around the world to order it, or order a hardcover or paperback version on my website and read it for yourself. The way things are starting to go in the U.S., the story may not be fiction for much longer. Watch this video and decide for yourself if you think the story is starting to become a reality now.
James had one dream: to save lives. But in a country torn apart by hate and fear, his own life became the ultimate battle. A new government driven by prejudice. A system that left no room for those like him. Immigrant, Muslim and brown skinned. Forced to abandon his life and live as a fugitive, he fought to survive in a country that saw him as an enemy. Every step brought new risks and unexpected alliances. But in the darkest moments, love found him. And together, they discovered that even in a state of despair, hope could still bloom. This is the story of one man's fight for freedom, survival, and love.
Welcome back. So let me read Michael Campy's next chapter here. and give you an idea of this, just to get an idea of what things could look like if it all falls apart. So let's see what we can come up with here. So I'm gonna, like before, I'm gonna read this. You follow along as you wish. The Priest, formerly known as Bob, Part 35 by Michael Campy. The Millennial Falcon. In the Star Wars movie, whenever Han Solo needed to go somewhere fast, he would kick his spaceship into faster than light hyperdrive. As I thought back on the pre-collapse world, there were two back-to-back events that kicked collapse into hyperdrive. The hurricanes that hit North Carolina and Florida in late 2024, and the fires in Southern California in early 2025. The news media, having been trained to ignore the current and upcoming pandemics of that time, never even mentioned the dangers of the widespread infections that would infect the population for years to come. It answered the question of why there were so few people left after the whole thing got rolling. Medical aid was decimated, hospitals were destroyed, doctors and support staff had their hands full trying to escape the disasters or save their families and homes, and the general population had their immediate survival in mind rather than something they couldn't see. But it was the thing in the dark, the thing they couldn't see, that eventually came for them and their families. COVID had a party as it was allowed to spread unchecked, and the previously slow evolution of bird flu, given free rein, rapidly mutated to achieve the much feared human-to-human transmission. Even as these events were happening, most people were still ignoring these dangers, and I'm convinced that the death of the old world had a lot to do with the intentional ignorance of humans. By the time they realized what was happening, it was way too late to even try to stop it. Some people, like me, had avoided the virus and made it through. Everyone else got sick and died because there was no one left to help. When the people in positions of power and influence began to get too sick to function anymore, then the whole social structure broke down. It was the madness from there on out. I'm still not sure if I'm glad to be alive or not. I didn't really mind the apocalypse because it meant fewer annoying people around, but there was also a lot less food, less shelter, more dangerous, unhinged individuals like the ones chasing us. And well, if I'm being honest, Dolly leaned towards dangerously unhinged, but at least he was on our team. It was a game of fantasy apocalypse where you tried to pick winners to join your team in the hope of having folks around that would support your bid for the ultimate Super Bowl win in the end times. I held on to a little of my old world self-interest, and as much as I liked this team and as much as my newfound altruism guided my actions, I really wanted, more than anything, to find out if this tiki bar at the end of the world was still serving Mai Tais. And that's all I've got for you here. I appreciate you coming in and listening to me. Gorma Haggett. Thank you for listening and watching the show. And I hope you enjoyed it. You'll return again to help me protest against these would-be tyrants. As I say goodbye this week, I wish to leave you with this rebel quote. Nation is not built by those who turn a blind eye to injustice, but by those who rise up against it. Schlanko Foyle.